Good morning. It is Friday, April the 19th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only one of two true conservatives in the United States of America today, the other one being the President of the United States. Because we make the presumption for the status quo, speaking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. And today the question is Sean Hannity a conservative? And the answer, like with Rush Limbaugh, is no, he is not, because he has the same problem that Rush Limbaugh has, in that he presumes, he does his definitions by non-essentials. He defines conservative by how he stands on the issues rather than getting to the essence of conservatism, which is the worldview, has to do with your worldview. Do you see the universe as being a place that is benevolent, that success is to be expected, or do you see the universe as a malevolent force and failure is to be expected, and therefore change is to be presumed? And he doesn't get to that particular point and doesn't therefore make the presumption for the status quo. As a matter of fact, that Sean Hannity has a lot of times, he's skirting right on the edge of being what I call a conservative idealist. Glenn Beck is one such person, where Glenn Beck is basically looking for a perfect society. And but Sean Hannity's close to that too, looking for a perfect society, just like the socialists are, except that Sean Hannity's looking for the perfect conservative society, as opposed to the socialists, who are, of course, looking for socialist paradise. So no, Sean Hannity is not a conservative. He also is more of a reactionary than a conservative. With Sean Hannity, his religion and religious views are more pronounced than those of Rush Limbaugh. Very rarely do I hear Rush Limbaugh talking about his faith, about going to church, that kind of thing. Sean Hannity is very open about the fact that he's a practicing Catholic and believes in God and Jesus Christ. So the question then comes about also is, does one have to be not a Catholic, but a Christian, or at least a believer of some sort? Do you have to believe in God to be conservative? Can an atheist be conservative? And I think that's something that I'll go ahead and take up on my next broadcast. But that's one of the things that makes a big difference between Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, is that Sean Hannity has more of a tendency to, again, be open about his religious views, whereas Rush Limbaugh has a tendency to keep those views to himself. So one of the other things I wanted to get to was the Mueller report and the presumption of innocence. I was listening this morning to an analysis about the Mueller report, and I believe it was on Glenn Beck's show, in which they stated that in the report there was a statement to the effect of that the question of whether or not the president is guilty of obstructing justice is left open, that there's the possibility, and so he might be guilty of being, of having had something to do with obstructing justice. And it's not true. The report basically comes out and says that it's basically what it's saying is there's no evidence against him, but that doesn't mean that there isn't evidence to be found. But that's not how the system works. Our criminal justice system is based on the idea of the presumption of innocence. Because somebody had made a remark to the effect of that being not guilty is not the same thing as being innocent. Yes, it is. When you're a juror, the first thing that you're instructed to do is to presume that the defendant is innocent. You don't presume that they're not guilty. You presume that they're innocent, and you go from there. if they're found not guilty at the end of the jurors find the defendant not guilty, then that means that they are innocent. A lot of people that that don't like jury verdicts, that not guilty jury verdicts, try to console themselves by saying, well, the jury didn't really say he was innocent. They just said he was not guilty. Same thing. It's basically the same difference. You're presumed innocent till proven guilty. That means that the President of the United States at this particular current time is innocent of any wrongdoing, whether it's of colluding with foreign agents to throw the election, or of obstructing or attempting to obstruct the investigation into that matter. So, the general to the specific. In this case, in the case of the Mueller report, because there's, of course, a lot of conservatives or ersatz conservatives that are trying on the radio to pick apart the Mueller report in anticipation that the left is going to be doing exactly the same thing. So they're trying to get ahead of it, and they're trying to influence public opinion on this particular report by going after the details. Well, there's a certain, in debate, and particularly when you're in a civil or criminal trial, usually what happens is that the prosecutors take a broad approach. They approach things in a very general way, and it is the defense that goes ahead and approaches everything in a detailed manner. They try to pick the prosecution's case apart in detail by going after certain details, where the prosecution's idea is to keep everything nice and broad and general. And so the same thing kind of applies here in terms of going ahead and not picking apart. What you should be doing, instead of going ahead and looking for all the little details. For instance, if somebody comes up to you and talks about, well, there was supposedly a quote in there about the president saying, I'm screwed now that there's going to be, now that Mueller's been appointed as a special counsel or a special investigator for this, and my presidency's ruined. And so some people are going to say that that shows that he had something to hide, or that he had a guilty conscience of some sort. These are people that are picking at the details of the report. The overall part of the report is there's no evidence of collusion, there's no evidence of obstruction of justice. So that's the way any conservative Trump supporter should be dealing with that issue. If you have some socialist in your life that comes up to you and says, hey, well, Donald Trump looked like in the report he had all kinds of things to hide, the best answer is to simply say, not guilty, no collusion, no obstruction of justice, and leave it at that. Keep it general, and the general message of the Mueller report was, again, not guilty of collusion, not guilty of obstruction of justice. So that's the way you need to deal with it, and it is the people in your life, the friends, relatives, and coworkers in your life that are socialists that you need to defeat. If you are under the impression that all we have to do is vote enough conservatives and Republicans into office who will then pass laws that will magically transform our culture, you're sadly mistaken. That's not going to help. It's going to make things worse. If socialism is to be defeated in our country, it has to be defeated retail. That means you and I have to defeat the socialists in our midst. And I've done that recently. There was a lady a socialist that I have recently parted company with. But that'll be details of that for a later episode. But again, the point is the responsibility falls on you and I to defeat socialism, to take the legs out from underneath socialism as a political movement. AOC, the lady that's referred to as AOC, Miss Cortez from New York, has supporters. Bernie Sanders has supporters, and those supporters may be your friends, relatives, and coworkers. And if you can defeat those friends, relatives, and coworkers, they will become demoralized and less likely to support people like Miss Cortez or Bernie Sanders. And at this point, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.